YouTubers, greetings. I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not driving my car without any sense of humor, I'm here at the Wolfula reviewing movies.
I hate a guy with a car and no sense of humor.
October reaches its end, Halloween, so it's only natural that it end with, well, you guessed it, November 1st. Oh, also my mega review of Halloween Ends, the controversial 13th and final chapter of the Halloween franchise, directed by David Gordon Green and released in 2022.
Michael Myers kills babysitters, not kids.
Before I get into this mega review of Halloween Ends, the final chapter in the franchise, or at least David Gordon Green's Halloween Trilogy, let me give you some context regarding its place in the franchise and how we even got to 13 Halloween movies.
It's Halloween. We're gonna have a good time tonight.
Halloween was never meant to have sequels, at least from the perspective of its creators. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill were commissioned by producers to make a low-budget B-movie about babysitters being stalked on Halloween, and they managed to make one of the most successful, influential, and beloved independent films of all time, and it happened to be a horror movie about a guy in a mask stabbing people. I'm sure Carpenter had a good time working on Halloween. He was given quite a bit of creative control within the parameters set for him. He got to work with his friends, he even got to put his name on the title, but Carpenter never intended there to be a Halloween sequel, of course. And ironically, even though his name hovers over the title, Carpenter never wanted a film like Halloween to be so associated with him that it would define his career, while his other classic films he's more proud of have mostly been cult hits.
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
Halloween was a major breakthrough from Carpenter, but it made it difficult for him to move on with his career. There was an expectation of him to make inexpensive horror films like Halloween that could bring in a lot of money.
The movie cost $300,000 to make, and it made $70 million.
$300,000 to make.
Yeah.
You can pretty much do that in your basement.
And immediately after Halloween's success, Carpenter faced pressures to oversee its sequels in order to make the movies he actually wanted to make. So, you know, from the outset, sequels to Halloween were made as an obligation by its creators.
I want to go to sleep.
Carpenter didn't have a story he wanted to tell, and he made sure that if there had to be a sequel with his involvement, it would be the only one, with Michael burnt to a crisp. Past the original film, Halloween as a series was supposed to end after one sequel. And I love Halloween 3, but I'm convinced that Carpenter's transition to the franchise being an anthology series with the most insane, difficult-to-market story imaginable was so he wouldn't have to produce another Halloween sequel, and without Carpenter's involvement, the Halloween series had difficulties moving forward under the leadership of the late Mustafa Akkad.
So on 4, I took it over and went back to the basics of number 1.
Some of the post-Carpenter sequels were good or okay, but held back by questionable choices. Mostly Akkad seemingly not knowing what Michael Myers' mask is supposed to look like. And there were some long gaps between some sequels because it seemed like they could never find sustained success before having to wipe the continuity slate clean.
Trick or treat, motherfucker!
Then David Gordon Green and his co-writer Danny McBride came along to helm their own trilogy of Halloween films that recently concluded. When they signed on for their then untitled Halloween sequel that ended up being called Halloween, I was skeptical but also intrigued.
You don't believe in the boogeyman? Well, you should.
From the very beginning of the series, starting with John Carpenter, directors of Halloween movies had to be asked to direct them, taking the job, sometimes begrudgingly, to either further their nascent careers or just as a favor when the first choices for directors weren't available. But with David Gordon Green, a director with a varied career and nearly 20 years of experience at the time, he was a fan that wanted to direct a Halloween movie, and ended up directing 2 more after that, becoming the director of the most Halloween films to date. And you look at the 2 directors tied for that title before him. Rick Rosenthal's follow-up to Halloween 2 was fucking Resurrection, and Rob Zombie was pressured into sequelizing his remake. Meanwhile, with Green, he was just down to make some Halloween movies, and it seemed like a return to part of what made the original movie work so well. A director getting to work on a horror movie with his friends. Green's crew was composed of people he'd worked with for years, and they'd get to have fun making Halloween movies together. Of course, there was the skepticism, especially with comedian Danny McBride involved as a co-writer and Green making some stoner comedies. There was some nervousness that these new Halloween movies would be trying to be funny instead of scary.
Chocolatey homemade brownie, I made that myself.
That's like what a 5-year-old would eat if they could make their own lunch.
But Jordan Peele made the transition from comedy to horror successfully, and while his films have humor to them, they're still above all horror films.
Ophelia, call the police.
Playing Fuck the Police by NWA.
And you know, we might have tuned out the jokes after so many rewatches, but the original Halloween did have a sense of humor.
Hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there.
There were jokes in it.
The only reason she babysits is to have a place.
Shit. I have a place for that.
The movie didn't take itself 100% seriously, but of course it dialed down the comedy when things needed to be scary.
First I get your famous chewing, now I get your famous squealing.
Then, of course, when what ultimately became a Halloween trilogy entered production with Jamie Lee Curtis on board to play Laurie Strode again, it was made clear that in order to accomplish this, they would be making the biggest retcon of Michael Myers' story to date without starting over from scratch like Rob Zombie. Not only would Halloween H2O and Resurrection be non-canon, Halloween 2, previously treated with the same level of canonicity as the original film, would stop being canon as well. Why? Because Halloween 2 introduced the family angle, Michael and Laurie being brother and sister.
That Strode girl, that's Michael Myers' sister.
He killed one sister 15 years ago, now he's trying to kill the other.
A controversial aspect of the sequels that gave Michael Myers more of a driving motivation. It made writing sequels easier, something to explain why Michael keeps coming after the same people.
I don't know them, please!
But it made him less mysterious, less a random force of nature hunting down anyone unlucky enough to wind up in his sights first, and more predictable with his murder priorities.
Did Hoffman say anything about living relatives?
A niece living in his hometown.
Of course, ignoring previous sequels has become a general strategy for franchises in recent years.
Wasn't it her brother who, cold-blooded mutilated all those teenagers?
That's just a bit that some people made up to make him feel better, I think.
Storylines become convoluted over time, but people don't really want a full reboot. They want to be able to have the characters from the original movie come back, mostly played by the same people, which has brought about the requel trend. Just skip all the sequels. You only need to see the first movie, and you probably did that already. You're good to go. Which, you know, is a band-aid for the problem movie studios are facing with popular franchises under their ownership that have sprawling, divergent continuities. It isn't a long-term solution to keep people caring about a movie franchise. Their favorite movies are getting older, so are the actors. People are getting less and less enthusiastic about watching movies where the heroes of their youth are in their 80s. Of course, another motivation for skipping sequels with the recent Halloween films is so the makers can do their own take on what a Halloween 2 would look like. It kinda sucks making a new film in a franchise knowing it's the 11th movie. If you don't count any of the other movies in the plot, you can at least make believe you're making the first ever sequel.
That's just a bit that some people made up to make him feel better, I think.
Then Halloween 2018 came out, and I liked it quite a bit. It felt like they really cared about making a new Halloween movie, trying to nail the vibe of the original film, balancing suspense with the bloody, bringing John Carpenter back to work on the score, making Michael more mysterious, making Laurie more interesting as a flawed character. But just like how Laurie is flawed, so too is the film. We get a lot of Michael in 2018, but it still feels like he gets lost in the shuffle, focusing on Laurie and the new characters, and you might say in the original Halloween, Michael barely has any screen time, but with that film, even if you didn't see him, you knew he was there. He's in nearly every scene. You just can't see him, but you feel him there. With Halloween 2018, instead of feeling Michael's presence throughout the film, you just see him a lot, and that doesn't have the same impact as feeling like you're being watched by somebody. There's no connective tissue to Michael's stalking in 2018 either. He just suddenly appears in Julian's closet fucking up the babysitter, which would be a surprise if it wasn't in the trailer, but with the original Halloween, Michael's general location is always firmly established. The surprise is in what he does next, where he emerges from to carry out the kill. Just having him pop out of nowhere feels unearned. There isn't the same sense of building anticipation to a kill. An overarching flaw with the Halloween trilogy is that Michael is less a hunter and more a killer. It's less about the thrill of the hunt for Michael, and more about just seeing a cool kill like with a Jason Voorhees. Some of Michael's mystery was restored, and some of it was ironically taken away with 2018's Halloween. I also didn't appreciate Michael being captured for 40 years and only escaping through the help of his new doctor, Sartain. It takes away Michael's sense of agency, that he's in control of things and he can just escape whenever he wants to. But I still had a good time watching Halloween 2018 and appreciated the things it did well enough that I could ultimately let the things it got wrong go.
The most important opportunity to understand the mind of evil, you see.
And then Halloween Kills came about after pandemic-induced delays, and I feel like it's the ultimate Halloween sequel in the sense that it feels like a mashup of everything that ever worked and didn't work about Halloween sequels. It gives us a lot more Michael killing a lot more people. We get to revisit the night of Halloween 78 in a new way. We get a bunch of returning characters from the original film sent off by the boogeyman. Dr. Loomis is even there. The performance isn't good, but he's there.
Michael kill again!
Halloween Kills is just a fun, fan-servicey movie for me. There are lots of baffling choices in it, a really unfocused narrative that jumps backwards and forwards in time, questionable character motivations where it seems like nearly all the characters let Michael kill them. But to me, there isn't a perfect Halloween sequel. All of them have flaws that hold them back from being at the same level as the original. It feels only right that I get such a kick out of watching a particularly flawed sequel that's more focused on having a good time than it is thinking too much about it. It feels like the point Kills is trying to make, that this whole trilogy is trying to make, is that when something like Michael comes along, people are too scared to think, to use their brains, so they act irrationally, driven by wild emotions.
Evil dies tonight!
Evil dies tonight!
All right, everybody, calm down.
It's how Michael infects Haddonfield, corrupts it. It's the thing that makes Michael more than a guy in a mask, why they call him the boogeyman and why he wins in the end. The kids who grew up with Michael's legend are now adults and his shadows grown larger in their minds, pushing them to do crazy shit out of fear like Dr. Loomis in the sequels.
No! No!
Michael isn't just a man, he's the Antichrist on the loose in our town.
Doc, it sounds to me like you're talking about the Antichrist. Well, perhaps I am.
I can look the other way on Halloween Kills' narrative flaws because to me it's more of a primal, violent slasher movie driven by raw emotion. But that approach essentially means Halloween Kills doubles down on the major flaw of 2018's Halloween. We don't really get to spend much time with Michael methodically stalking anybody for more than one scene. There are a lot more kills, but it also means characters are killed in quick succession, which is disappointing and makes it feel like there weren't many kills anyway because they blend together. Halloween Kills is a flawed movie, but one I really enjoy watching more than the other Michael Myers sequels because it's fun throughout, even when it doesn't quite make sense. I also just love the visuals, music, and Laurie's narration during Kills' denouement. It's dumb but cool. It gives me chills every time I watch it.
The more he kills, the more he transcends into something impossible to defeat.
So now we finally come to Halloween Ends. Both Halloween Kills and Ends were announced simultaneously in the wake of Halloween 2018's box office success.
The saga of Michael Myers and Laurie Strode isn't over.
Further sequels seemed inevitable, but it came as a relief at the time with Halloween Ends' name that there was an overarching story in mind that would have a set conclusion.
Oh, let it burn!
Then the pandemic happened and Halloween Kills' release, despite being finished, was delayed for a year, even though it ended up being released simultaneously on Peacock when it finally came out anyway, and consequently the shooting and release of Halloween Ends was delayed a year as well. David Gordon Green has said that Halloween Ends is the film he always intended it to be, but I'm not so sure. I think the year-long delay and the pandemic resulted in a change of direction for Green's Halloween trilogy. Evident from Halloween Kills' originally intended ending, seen in its home video release's extended cut, conspicuously not referred to as a director's cut. Halloween Kills was supposed to end with Laurie preparing for battle, leaving the hospital carrying a knife. The implication being that Halloween Ends would be a direct continuation of Kills, this whole trilogy taking place on one Halloween, a 5+ hour-long Halloween sequel.
I'm coming for you, Michael.
Then the movie got delayed a year, the world changed a lot, and I'm sure a lot of reconsidering was done by David Gordon Green in how to approach ending his Halloween trilogy. A lot of time had passed, so it probably felt like they couldn't keep the momentum going from Kills like they would have if Ends had been shot before Kills' release like planned, and that they were stretching one night thin.
Maybe we'll find him tomorrow or next Halloween when the sun sets and someone is alone.
There was also probably concern that Halloween Ends wouldn't feel relevant still stuck in 2018, and that they could say something about the world today with how Haddonfield changed in the wake of Michael's carnage. You know, getting political. I don't want to have to think about the things I watch and come out of them with my own opinion and perspective. That's why this video is so short. Green and his co-writers have said that Halloween Ends was never supposed to take place on the same night as its predecessors, but based on Kills' original ending, I'm just not sure about that. So Laurie Strode gearing up to fight Michael at the end of Halloween Kills was cut out of the movie we saw in theaters because it was hyping up a sequel that was no longer going to be made. We were getting a very different Halloween Ends instead, a weirder, more experimental, introspective Halloween film that would be more concerned with telling a new, different story than ending an existing one, arguably dividing fans more than any other Halloween movie before it. I didn't look at any of the leaks leading up to Halloween Ends' release, and actively disregarded any leaks viewers of my videos tried to share with me. I just want to watch the trailers and eventually the movie. I don't want to have a movie described to me by a third party before I watch it. And the trailers for Halloween Ends were a big change from Halloween 2018's and Kills trailers that gave away most of the story and deaths. Halloween Ends seemed to show Michael killing a lot of random people in the trailers, but they were new characters with no context of who they were in the story. Halloween Ends' trailers were intentionally misleading, seeming to present a return to the original film's approach where Michael would for some reason be stalking Laurie Strode one last time.
I was certain that I saw him watching me.
It seemed like they shot alternate takes of certain scenes just for the trailers to try to throw off fans. So I didn't really know what to expect from Halloween Ends, and when I finally saw it in theaters, it was a real surprise and not the movie I wanted as the ending to the Halloween series, my favorite horror franchise. But even though it wasn't what I would want from an ending, take it for what it is, and despite its flaws, I really fucking like Halloween Ends. And I'll explain why in my mega review of Halloween Ends. But first I have a message from my sponsor, me! Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested, and I thank you in advance. Halloween Ends, begins with something different from its predecessors. The song Midnight Monsters Hop, a Halloween novelty song that was a precursor to the Monster Mash, a stark contrast to the dark, atmospheric Carpenter music that played over 2018's and Kills openings. An early tip-off Ends goes in a very different direction. The next tip-off for that is, well, meeting the main character of Halloween Ends a year after Michael's wave of slayings in 2018. Corey Cunningham, played by Rowan Campbell. Yes, a character who has never been seen until now is the main character of the final chapter of a trilogy, at least until the final act. Making a brand new character so important in this film when there are so many returning characters that get so little screen time in comparison is the biggest criticism of Halloween Ends. The thing that baffled most viewers, but I see what they were trying to go here with Corey, and I'll get into that later.
Yeah, I'll sure give it a shot, little dude.
Starting out, Corey is a babysitter on Halloween. 1978 Laurie Strode if she was a dude, a clean-cut, straight-edge kid with a bright future ahead of him.
He's just really sensitive to things that give him bad dreams.
Right, all that just sounds like normal kid imagination stuff.
And Corey is put in charge of a boy named Jeremy Allen, and, much like Laurie and Tommy in 1978, Corey and Jeremy watch a version of The Thing. So wait, does this mean John Carpenter exists in the Halloween universe?
Hi, Annie.
Oh, hi, Paul.
The thing is, unlike Tommy, who was just kind of paranoid, hyperactive, and concerned with evil dying tonight,
evil dies tonight!
Jeremy's a total dick who tests Corey's patience.
And I don't really feel like pretending to be best friends with an ugly-ass boy babysitter.
5 minutes and then you're going to bed.
But things take a turn when Jeremy disappears into the night, and the concerned Corey searches for the brat. The search for Jeremy is a tense sequence that reminds me of the opening of the OG When a Stranger Calls. That sequence where Carol Kane is babysitting and it's heavily implied that somebody's in the house. You just don't know what's gonna happen until it finally happens. Same with Halloween Ends. Michael just has to be in the Allen house somewhere. The sequence is a riff on the overarching theme of fear and paranoia across this trilogy, pushing people to do unreasonable things, and even when it becomes clear it's just Jeremy fucking around, locking Corey up in the attic.
Hey, let me out. Are you scared?
Jake?
Corey still succumbs to his fears and does the worst thing you can possibly do as a babysitter besides fucking one of the parents. Corey kills the shit out of Jeremy. Jeremy was supposed to be babysat, but now he's baby splat. This shocking opening quickly goes from being Laurie on Halloween 1978 to being Michael on Halloween 1963, except the babysitter kills the kid. And Corey's life goes in a darker direction as he becomes Haddonfield's new killer in the absence of their first boogeyman. The drive home that Halloween Ends is a different take on a Halloween movie is the opening credits sequence using the blue font from Halloween 3. As different a Halloween movie as you can possibly get without having it not take place on a Halloween. Stop it! It took the use of Halloween 3's typeface for me to realize that while Halloween 2018 uses 78's typeface, Halloween Kills uses Halloween 2's typeface. It's like poetry, it rhymes. According to David Gordon Green, though he might be bullshitting, Halloween Ends was supposed to have a final scene at the Silver Shamrock Factory. Most likely a post-credits thing where we see Michael Myers' mask getting made amongst the witch, skull, and pumpkin masks, and this scene was apparently in every draft of the script but never shot.
What final process?
Don't ask me.
As for the jack-o'-lantern opening sequence where pumpkins emerge from each other like nesting dolls, it's tied to the film's overarching theme of evil being unleashed from within.
There's the evil that exists as an external force that threatens the well-being of the tribe.
Michael was an external evil that threatened the people of Haddonfield.
The other kind of evil lives inside us, like a sickness or an infection.
But Ends grapples with the internal evil that lives within inside all of us, especially me. And that evil can spread and infect people like a disease, sort of like herpes, but with fewer blisters.
It's more dangerous, because we may not know we're infected.
Halloween Ends jumps ahead 3 years later and revisits Laurie Strode with something the Halloween series has never had before, despite its complicated continuity. A clip show recap of the original Halloween and the last 2 movies.
His senseless brutality ravaged my community and killed my daughter.
It's a little weird having something like this suddenly in a final movie, but to me, in the context of this new trilogy, the original Halloween acts as a prologue, a backstory for the new narrative of Halloween 2018 Kills, the story of Michael Myers' massacre on the Halloween of 2018. Much in the same way Halloween 1978 is a prologue set 40 years earlier, Halloween Ends is an epilogue set 4 years later, and epilogues are all about looking back on what's happened and giving closure to the events in a story later down the line.
And then he vanished.
The recap doesn't just summarize what happened in 3 of the earlier movies, though, but what's happened to Haddonfield in the wake of Michael's bloodiest killing spree yet. The town is rotting away. Grief has transformed Haddonfield into a darker place of violence and fear. We're shown mysterious slayings with no convenient boogeyman to pin them on, and we even see Oscar's mom hang herself in some twisted recreation of her son's murder.
You think he's come back?
Michael doesn't use guns.
All of this bleakness leads Laurie to turn her life around, move into town with her granddaughter, and start putting her story into a book. Yeah, the movie has Laurie giving narration every now and then that are passages from the book she's writing.
I'm hopeful with perspective that my experience will help others heal.
And I'm not so into this plot device just because we've seen the survivor writing a book thing played out so much in the Scream series, and there's that cynical aspect of monetizing your pain. I would have maybe preferred seeing Laurie saying the same shit in a self-help group or to a therapist, but, oh, you know, she's writing a book. Good for her.
I bought a home, a place to live, not a trap, not a place to hide.
All of this basically sets up a different approach to a showdown between Michael Myers and Laurie Strode, though. Laurie was prepared for Michael in Halloween 2018. She lived in a fortress and had more guns than a teen telling you not to go to school tomorrow. But in Halloween Ends, Laurie lets her guard down for the first time in 44 years so she can let people in. But one of those people happens to eventually be Michael Myers. Eventually.
That evil inside.
For now, we deal with Corey Cunningham. Years after his maybe accidental killing of that kid who probably deserved to die, Corey has been let off the hook and his life has taken a turn. He's given up on his dream of becoming an engineer and instead, you know, still gets to work with engines as a junk man at his caring stepdad's scrapyard, looking all Ready Player One. And before this job, Corey worked at a call center for Devon Graham.
Well, I just might have to send him back to the call center to work for Devon if you can't give him proper supervision.
Yes, that Devon Graham.
Hey, isn't that Devon Graham? I think he's cute.
Because Corey never moved on with his life, he's stuck living under the roof of his weird, overly protective, domineering mother, which is a running theme of future slasher killers.
Boys who keep secrets don't get custard for dessert.
Corey Cunningham as a character has various inspirations. The most obvious based on the name is Arnie Cunningham from John Carpenter's adaptation of Stephen King's Christine, a nerdy loser who, upon purchasing and fixing up an evil sentient Plymouth Fury, Arnie transforms into Stephen King's outdated 50s idea of a cool guy, i.e. a leather jacket wearing greaser who becomes abusive to his friends and loved ones.
Well, this is just me and her husband. Get away from her! Get away from her!
Corey's character arc closely mirrors Arnie's once Corey has his own encounter with a different kind of Carpenter-esque evil, and Corey becomes a nerd's idea of a cool guy and tries too hard, not realizing that's antithetical to being cool, kinda like Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 3. Another inspiration for Corey Cunningham's character is less obvious. Billy Lynch from Butcher, Baker, Nightmare Maker. Billy in that film lives with a domineering aunt who is later revealed to be his real mother, and she really wants to fuck her own son. Okay.
Oh no, no.
Billy also becomes accused of a murder he didn't commit, and his life is turned upside down, much like what happens to Corey. There are many other subtle and not-so-subtle inspirations for Halloween Ends. The film is a tribute to the horror movies David Gordon Green grew up with, particularly the early slashers that came out in the wake of the original Halloween's release that weren't just the obvious guy in a mask killing people, but were instead more psychological character studies in nature, while still being really gory. Just with more traumatized, sympathetic human villains instead of the embodiment of pure evil that Michael Myers is. In some ways, it feels fitting for a final Halloween film to be more about a character inspired by Michael Myers while not being an exact copy of him, in the same way the early slasher films tried to duplicate Halloween's success with human antagonists. One other conspicuous inspiration for Corey Cunningham's character, though, is, well, the director of Halloween Ends himself, David Gordon Green. Listening to the Blu-ray commentary of Halloween Ends, it became clear to me that Corey is at least partially autobiographical in nature. His personality as an awkward, goody-two-shoes nerd is based on a young version of Green, down to a preference for chocolate milk as a beverage over alcohol, with Green even requesting that Corey drink Chocolate Soldier, an obscure, long-discontinued real drink from David Gordon Green's youth. Hopefully the murder and incest mom stuff isn't also based on David Gordon Green's life story. It's clear that Green wanted to tell a more personal story with Halloween Ends, very different from other Halloween films, modeling itself after the weirder, darker, character-driven slasher films that Halloween inspired. But Corey being at least partially based on his creator does, come with maybe labeling Corey as a self-insert, and the fan-fiction-y aspects of his character become easier to notice when Corey also becomes romantically tied to Laurie Strode's granddaughter and becomes the new Michael Myers himself, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Still, so much focus on paying tribute to non-Halloween movies and the semi-biographical nature of the film does make Halloween Ends seem really self-indulgent as a Halloween movie, which wouldn't be too bad taken on its own. I mean, Rob Zombie shot an entire scene of his wife pole dancing in one of his Halloween movies, but an argument can easily be made that a Halloween film like this shouldn't necessarily be treated as the final Halloween movie ever, but, you know, whatever.
You're that psycho babysitter. He killed that kid, didn't he? Yep.
Anyway, though, Laurie stands up for Corey after he gets attacked by the most tragic teens to ever get bullied by. Band geeks! Yesterday's dorks are today's dicks.
Look at this. I mean, a psycho meets a freak show. Wow.
And by taking Corey to Dr. Mathis, Laurie knowingly tries to set Corey up with her granddaughter Allison, now a nurse.
Cute, isn't she?
Little trivia, Dr. Mathis is mentioned in Halloween Kills as the sleazy boss of the guy dressed up as a doctor, who's actually a nurse.
The vulgar-ass boss acted inappropriately.
I'm gonna
He
quit
would have
that
punched Dr. Mathis in the face.
And he's just as sleazy when we see him in this movie.
You look so fucking hot at the office today.
Whatever, the point is, Allison and Corey fall for each other, and it's a kind of questionable aspect of Halloween Ends in its execution.
Why can't the bicycle stand on its own?
No, it can't. It's got a kickstand.
Because it was too tired.
Halloween Ends is ultimately a love story, to the point where crew members were confused if they were even making a Halloween film. But it doesn't really make much sense for why Allison is so in love with Corey so quickly despite his reputation.
Should go out sometime and do something.
With me?
With both of us.
Halloween Ends should have been just as much about Allison as it is about Corey, but unfortunately up to this film, we haven't really gotten to know Allison all that much as a character. The focus has been on Laurie and using Allison as a motivation for Laurie to turn her life around. But one thing we do know about Allison is that she is a driven, pragmatic character with low tolerance for bullshit in her life.
Where? I didn't.
You are so pathetic. I'm going home. You can figure your own shit out.
Allison seems like she has a good head on her shoulders, so it seems unlikely that she'd be attracted to a troubled guy with no future. At the same time, Allison lost everything in the last 2 movies. Her parents and all her friends were killed. She got it so much worse than Laurie did in 1978. But she's still coping without turning her tragic backstory into a Batman origin story. But the fact is, Allison has nobody to turn to that relates to her trauma except her grandma and her grandma's weird tarot card slinging friend recreating memes she was in. So with Corey, Allison has the opportunity to connect with somebody with a tragic, violent past without bonding over encounters with Michael Myers, which is ironic given what happens with Corey later. Also, seeing the last dude Allison dated is a cop who looks like a time-traveling Richard Dreyfuss from the 70s, the son of one of those Mulaney shitheads from Halloween Kills.
You're under arrest for being the prettiest girl I know.
Well, the male prospects in a town like Haddonfield can't be great, especially given how the most famous man from Haddonfield murders people for a living. Ben Tramer was as good as it gets for Haddonfield men, which is sad to say given we meet Ben's grandson Terry Tramer in this movie, and the kid's a total punk. He tarnishes the Tramer legacy.
Your father fucking hates you. He hates me?
But, you know, we don't get a lot of clear answers for what Allison sees in Corey and why she's ride or die for him after a week besides a shared trauma surrounding Halloween, beyond maybe dating a guy with a similar history to the man who ruined her life will help her heal, face her trauma directly, or Allison's unwilling to admit she has a fixation towards evil like her grandmother does and is attracted to danger.
You're actually just obsessed with death, like it's some sort of game.
John Carpenter himself has said that Michael Myers in the original Halloween is drawn to Laurie Strode because they're both repressed people. And I guess that can also explain why Allison is drawn to Corey, because they definitely have repression in common with each other.
What happened if she were all alone if I left?
So you gotta stay here, protect her from herself forever?
The clearest motivation for Allison being with Corey is finally leaving Haddonfield, and Corey represents an escape from her normal life and the possibility for Allison to finally break free from her grandmother's legacy and be her own person.
You can have a good life, just not with him.
But still, this is all very ambiguous. You can read all of this into Allison's character motivations, but only because she's so vaguely defined. The first 2 Halloweens were the only time a woman actually wrote for Halloween movies, specifically to handle writing the female characters. Halloween Ends had 4 dudes writing it. It maybe would have helped if they brought in a woman to punch up the Allison parts of the story, because it seems like unless they're firing a gun at Michael Myers or wallowing in grief, David Gordon Green doesn't necessarily know how to write for female characters.
Imagine if your grandmother had fallen in love with Michael Myers, but she didn't.
At the same time, though, it kind of makes sense for the final chapter of this trilogy to be a love story like this, when the overarching themes of Halloween's 2018 and Kills are that fear and love make people do crazy, irrational, and stupid things.
Motherfucker!
Allison's and Corey's relationship is just the ultimate culmination of these themes, with a romance built on fear that doesn't make much sense, because love doesn't make a lot of sense. And you can't argue that Allison's questionable romantic motivations can be attributed to women in general often having questionable taste in men that don't really seem to make much sense as well.
I would like to see those cherry blossoms. I think you'd like them too.
Corey's and Allison's love story isn't the only romance in Halloween Ends. There is also a low-key thing going on between Laurie and Deputy Hawkins, the latter of which has a new lease on life after surviving what should have really probably killed him. Hawkins' survival in Halloween Kills is a little frustrating in Ends because he doesn't really play a major role in the story of this final chapter. In retrospect, it seemed like him surviving in Kills only served the dual purpose of giving Laurie somebody to talk to in the hospital and offering some additional fan service context about how Michael was incarcerated again in '78.
He needs to die. And I'm the one who's gonna get him.
But Hawkins doesn't make good on his promise in Kills, and doesn't finally get to do anything cool or redeem himself in Ends. He's just a guy who let Myers live, got his ass kicked by Mike's doctor, and survived. At the same time, Hawkins' real purpose in Ends is to give Laurie a reason to live, and not just live, but actually live her life.
But I tell you, I feel like I won an extra life. I really do. Now I'm learning Japanese.
And I noticed that Hawkins is one of the few people that actually believes Corey deserves a second chance.
He's a good kid. Had a tough break.
Because Hawkins himself killed somebody accidentally on a Halloween and was traumatized by it.
Just because your intentions are good doesn't mean things always work out.
And if you listen closely during the grocery store scene, you can faintly hear an instrumental cover of Don't Fear the Reaper playing, foreshadowing the film's ending.
I like your hair.
Thanks.
Of course, Laurie's hope and optimism during this encounter with Hawkins is dashed when she comes face to face with an unlikely survivor of Michael's killing spree, Sandra, who survived Michael shoving a fluorescent light tube up her throat. It doesn't seem likely Sandra would live through that, but she did live near Laurie's home, and the fire department was quick. The authorities were nearby. Maybe somebody spotted Michael leaving Sandra's house, and they saved her just in time.
She cannot speak because of you!
Really, though, this confrontation is just here to give Laurie some guilt that she came out of her Michael Myers encounters mostly fine, and make Laurie feel like she didn't do enough. Who else could have survived Halloween 2018 alive but totally wrecked to make Laurie feel bad? Erin the podcaster? The lady who showed up to fight Michael Myers with a clothing iron? Sandra was the most likely. And hey, it makes her one of very few new characters in this trilogy to have survived their encounter with Michael Myers, so she's got that going for her.
You provoked that man when you should have left him alone.
And speaking of Michael Myers, well, Halloween Ends has Michael Myers in it. He's just not in it a lot. In fact, Michael Myers is in the movie so little I forget he exists. And then when he does show up, I say, Michael Myers is in this movie? Yeah, Michael Myers doesn't have a lot of screen time in Halloween Ends, but he technically has more screen time in Ends than he does in the original Halloween. Again, though, in that movie, Michael is mostly hiding in the background, so of course he doesn't have a lot of screen time. But Michael's still in most of the scenes somewhere. In Ends, we might see Michael Myers more, but he's definitely not out anywhere hiding except in a yucky sewer. Yeah, Michael lost his house during the pandemic. Too many good people ended up losing their homes.
You just act like a goddamn asshole because your father treats you like one.
Corey ends up meeting Michael after a near-fatal encounter with those band geeks again, and Cunningham is taken into the Shape's subterranean refuge. Michael nearly kills Corey, but the Shape sees something of himself in the boy's eyes and spares him. It kind of goes back to Loomis in the original film saying he saw evil living behind Michael's eyes.
Because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Corey has that kind of evil lurking in him too. He just doesn't know it yet, until he kills a crazy homeless man soon after, mostly in self-defense, and Corey's path as a killer begins to take shape. Michael in Halloween Ends takes a backseat and is disappointingly pathetic. A shadow of his former self, but much like Haddonfield, Michael is rotting away, both internally and externally. The only thing that keeps him going is killing. To me, the state Michael is in is the consequences of all the abuse he took in the last two movies. His age and all the damage Michael sustained has finally caught up with him. It's something I appreciated about these new Halloween movies. Michael doesn't just self-heal like he's Wolverine. These films actually keep track of the damage Michael sustained over the years, at least within their own continuity. In 2018, Michael's eye is still fucked up from Laurie stabbing it with a hanger. In Kills, Michael's still missing some of his fingers after they got blown off. And in Ends, Michael is a total wreck after everything that happened since. Meanwhile, in, like, Halloween 2, Michael's eyes are fine after Laurie stabbed them, even though it's the same night, and in H2O, the movie that ditched the supernatural shit in between, both of Michael's eyes are totally fine after getting shot in them, and Michael's also conspicuously not burned up either.
You told me yourself you watched him burn.
It was a mix of that sloppiness of not bothering to keep track of continuity while also wanting to make more movies, so you try to downplay just how injured Michael would get from sequel to sequel, hoping people wouldn't notice or just let it go. With Halloween Ends, though, Michael barely survived the last movie, so he's barely hanging on now. To me, Michael isn't supernatural, at least not in an obvious external way. He can't heal fast, he isn't invincible. He's physically a normal human being. You hurt him, he'll feel pain. What makes Michael more than a human, though, and ambiguously supernatural, is the evil inside him, the darkness inside that drives him to kill, but also to ultimately keep going in spite of all the pain he experiences himself. Michael is the living embodiment of pure evil. But he's still a human being, and not going to the hospital as a critically wounded man in his 60s has taken its toll. But despite his shabby exterior, Michael has still managed to live after 4 years under the worst possible conditions outside of Mexico. That's pretty impressive, even if it doesn't look impressive. Michael isn't the main killer of Halloween Ends, the final film of, at least, this trilogy, and it rubs people the wrong way. Admittedly, I was hoping they would go back to the roots of the original movie for a final film with Michael stalking Laurie again, or random people. Something more low-key, smaller scale, and atmospheric like the original film, and, you know, Halloween Ends is those things, but Michael isn't doing much stalking or killing. He doesn't drive the story as a murderer. Corey Cunningham does as a self-appointed disciple of the Shape.
You feel safe with this guy?
Beginning by luring Allison's ex, Officer Mulaney, to Myers' cave so the boy can learn how real killing's done. The Shape getting back into shape in the process of this rejuvenating experience. Starting out, Corey and Michael have an unspoken arrangement as murder partners in crime, but Corey is ultimately a very different killer from Michael. Corey's more human in his ambitions, motivated by revenge, killing people who have wronged him or Allison.
Just burn it all to the ground.
Oh, like the match.
It's a throwback to how so many slasher movies after Halloween were based around killers seeking revenge.
Maybe I have been waiting all day for this.
Corey initially targets Dr. Mathis and the nurse the doctor sleeps with in exchange for the promotion Allison was gunning for. Donning a scarecrow mask, Corey's a cruder, messier killer than Michael, and his results starting out are more like those of a real-life serial killer. But to Corey's surprise, Michael has been stalking Corey's stalking and is one step ahead of Corey, dispatching the nurse in a retread of one of Michael's classic, more artistic murders from the original film. The kind of murder Corey isn't capable of. It's here where Corey realizes, though, that to be Haddonfield's new Michael Myers, he has to actually become Michael Myers.
Is there a doctor in the house?
The Halloween series had long toyed with potential sequels featuring a copycat Michael Myers. Most famously, Halloween 4 teased Jamie Lloyd, Michael's niece, becoming the new killer. So if there was a Halloween 5, logically she would be a killer alongside Michael, or she'd replace him entirely. Then Halloween 5 backpedaled and stuck to Michael as a killer.
You're just like me.
Then Halloween H2O was supposed to have a copycat Michael Myers in it, Charlie, the dude played by the guy who played the kid version of Robin Williams in Jumanji. Charlie was supposed to be a teen killing his classmates at his school, dressed as Michael Myers, and then eventually the real Michael Myers would show up towards the end and take out Charlie. That didn't end up happening, though. Charlie was just a horny friend of Josh Hartnett, who unfortunately had to witness that terrible CGI mask.
Animal sex.
Ironically, Halloween Resurrection ended up retconning the end of H2O so that it wasn't Michael dying at the end, and instead just some random guy. Rob Zombie wasn't going to be involved in the follow-up to his Halloween 2, but the initial plan for what would have been called Halloween 3D would have been Scout Taylor Compton's Laurie Strode becoming the new killer of the franchise. None of these ideas for a new Halloween killer got off the ground because, well, there was a fear that they would prove to be unpopular with fans who want the killer they like to just come back and do all the killing, which, in fairness, included the original series producer Mustafa Akkad.
You know, in every script they want to kill him, I tell them, wait a minute, Michael Myers. I love this guy.
Who was extremely against permanently killing off Michael or replacing him, but mostly because Michael was Akkad's bread and butter.
So they wanted to end it with Michael Myers dying, Jamie Lee just ending it. They said, but Mustafa doesn't want that. He doesn't want to end it of course, because it's his bread and butter.
Friday the 13th had already toyed with having replacement killers twice. The first time was more successful, when a certain fella named Jason Voorhees took over in his mother's absence in Part 2. When Part 5 came along, they thought they could catch lightning in a bottle twice by revealing that Jason was no longer the killer in Part 5. And Part 6 would potentially see Jason's nemesis Tommy Jarvis take over from here as the killer, but the idea wasn't embraced by audiences. So Paramount chickened out and gave us the safer but fun Part 6 we know today, featuring an undead incarnation of Jason. Point is, killer swaps are generally not popular with people. It's only worked out in the Scream franchise. And, you know, the last time the Halloween franchise tried to change things up, it took like 20 to 30 years before people felt comfortable saying they like it. When Rowan Campbell signed on as Corey, David Gordon Green and Jamie Lee Curtis went out of their ways to tell him he'd be getting a lot of heat from fans. But I don't know why they'd have to do that. When have fans ever been toxic towards actors online?
Hey! Assholes!
Halloween Ends takes the opportunity to finally explore the idea of a successor to Michael Myers, but Corey isn't meant to be a replacement for the Shape, though. Corey is a character study into the kinds of circumstances that would result in somebody going down a path similar to Michael Myers, through the lens of somebody who is essentially a composite of both Laurie Strode and Michael Myers, exploring the ways Michael and Laurie are different and similar through Corey, who is both a victim and victimizer, a babysitter turned murderer. It kinda makes sense why Halloween Ends went into this direction. Halloween 2018 was an exploration of Laurie's character, while Kills was an investigation into what drives Michael. Ends as a farewell to Michael's and Laurie's dynamic is a different representation of their war with each other, happening within Corey's mind. What endears Laurie to Corey is that despite the dark turn his life took, she could tell Corey was still the good kid he always was, just troubled. But that changes when he falls under Michael's influence and gives into his darker nature that he was able to repress for 3 years.
Did the town do this to him after the accident, or was it always there?
Maybe this was always Corey's destiny, or maybe forces outside his control made him this way. Who knows? Corey is also an opportunity to make a more human take on Michael Myers without ruining the mystery of the actual Michael Myers by making him vocal and giving him a more sympathetic backstory like Rob Zombie did. Corey isn't Michael, but he looks a lot like Michael when he was the same age as Corey. They even fucking dressed Corey like Tony Moran, the original actor who played the unmasked Michael from an episode of The Waltons. Basically, Corey is Michael without being Michael, and the ways Corey isn't like Michael highlight just how special Michael Myers as a villain is. Corey's ultimate ambition is to become the new Michael Myers, and that starts with getting Michael's mask, and after a short tussle, Corey gets just that without much effort, showing just how out of step Michael is at this point. It feels fitting for Corey to wear Michael's mask, though, because that's what Halloween's all about, dressing up and pretending you're somebody else.
The man in a Halloween mask.
Corey's killing spree on Halloween is a continuation of his revenge kick. The interesting thing about Corey is he, for the most part, only kills people who are scummy. Starting out with luring Terry Tramer's crew to the junkyard.
Suck your own. Oh my god!
And unfortunately, Terry takes out Corey's cool stepdad in the process. But Corey gets even and then some. The next murder is straight out of Michael's playbook, with Corey recreating the Shape's first ever slaying with his own mother in Judith's place. Corey's final murders are taken out on Willie the Kid, a local radio shock jock who runs WURG, The Urge, a radio station with multiple cameos in Halloween Kills.
WURG, Willie the Kid.
Willie's a funny character because he really throws off the time period of Halloween Ends.
Let's go get our moms out. Give us something to scream about.
His style is a throwback to the 70s, and the fact that one of the characters in this movie is a radio DJ after Halloween 2018 tried to be modern with podcast hosts is pretty wild.
Investigative journalists?
It's also a nod to Adrienne Barbeau in The Fog, because you might as well homage Carpenter in as many ways possible at this point.
Michael Myers was murdered that night, and the heavy breather with the mask was the same man who poisoned Pope John Paul I.
Willie uses his platform to exploit the many tragedies surrounding Haddonfield and actively promotes misinformation that has turned residents against survivors of Michael Myers like Laurie.
Y'all know the Laurie Strode story? She teased the man with brain damage and then he snapped.
Making Corey a prime target for Willie. After the fake shape dispatches the nice lady who got me a Silver Bolo award, Willie is next, and it's honestly one of the most brutal deaths in the Halloween franchise. Savage as fuck! What's interesting is Corey never tries to kill Jeremy's parents, especially Jeremy's mom, who believes Corey killed her son on purpose.
I know it was no accident.
Because even though Jeremy's mom is harsh in her judgments, she didn't really do anything wrong to Corey, and he probably feels guilty for even unintentionally killing Jeremy. Corey doesn't bring Jeremy's family any further harm on this Halloween. The only people Corey or Michael kill in Ends are conveniently all terrible people that nobody would necessarily miss. The only good character that dies is Corey's stepdad. No! But he's killed by one of Corey's shitty victims. In a way, it seems like Halloween Ends balances out its grim atmosphere by having none of the major deaths be bummers like some of the deaths in 2018 are kills. So Halloween Ends can be a happy ending. The endgame for Corey is ridding Haddonfield of Laurie Strode, so Allison has no reason to stay in this town and the two lovers can break free of their old lives together. But Laurie beats Corey to the punch by murdering herself. But not really.
Did you really think I'd kill myself?
Corey's no Michael and is easy to dispatch, but unlike Laurie, Corey's less of a cherry blossoms person and more of a suicide person. At the worst time when Allison comes home. Corey's death here is actually foreshadowed earlier in Halloween Ends when Corey seemingly has a seizure at the Halloween party, the overstimulation causing him to act out his later demise in Allison's arms. Corey wasn't originally intended to die. Part of why he was created was to give the producers of the Halloween series an option to continue the franchise without Michael, but it was ultimately decided not to keep Corey's fate open-ended and instead have Michael finish him off. Corey Cunningham's ultimate purpose was to bring Michael Myers and Laurie Strode back into each other's sights one last time, but it's frustrating that he doesn't really seemingly have any meaningful relevance to the story beyond his death. I honestly really enjoyed Corey's character arc in Halloween Ends, but it is unfortunate that it was only a means to an end, literally, so Corey could be a Michael Myers delivery boy. Essentially, David Gordon Green didn't want to tell the same story as the previous two films, where Michael and Laurie have some close calls, killing time until their actual real final battle. So instead, Green crafted an unexpected way for the two to come to blows again. But it ends up making Corey seem like filler before getting to the fight, which ends up doing Corey's part of the movie a disservice. The fight itself, though, well, I had mixed feelings about it initially, but it really is interesting as something far more even as a fight, more intimate in nature and smaller scale like Michael's encounter with Laurie in the original film, a departure from the more elaborate fights we've seen in Halloween H2O in 2018. It's a one-on-one brawl in a normal setting, and Laurie has to rely on her wits to survive instead of guns and traps. It's a cool way to take out Michael Myers, but it seems like Laurie and Michael are destined to kill each other in the end. Except Allison intervenes. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. This highlights the true difference between Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. Laurie has somebody who cares about her, while somebody like Michael went out of his way to make sure the closest thing he'd ever have to a legacy was extinguished. Michael has nobody to come to his rescue. Evil dies tonight, love lives today.
He's dead. Not dead enough.
Now, the next sequence I have even more mixed feelings about, the procession. This sequence was filmed during last-minute reshoots a few months before release because David Gordon Green felt that just ending on Michael's bleeding out didn't feel final enough, so Laurie and Allison haul Michael's corpse to the junkyard, and the whole town on short notice gathers around to attend Michael Myers' funeral, with his few survivors acting as witness, and the townspeople crowd-surf Michael's remains into an industrial shredder. It's like they planned ahead, if Michael Myers ever dies, we're gonna do exactly this thing. It's a little hard to believe, but I think this could be taken as an embellishment on the part of Laurie writing her book.
And the story as we told it was to fade with time.
Michael's disposal is the final cleansing of Haddonfield of the evil that first infected it. All the dark influences that had been rotting the town away have been extinguished through Corey's and Michael's bloody assault, so the town of Haddonfield can finally heal and move on from the events that began in 1963. The film fittingly ends on the morning of November 1st, and Allison can move on and make a new life for herself, which we'll see in the Allison spin-off film series. Laurie herself can finally actually live her life without Michael's shadow hanging over her. For a film series all about death, its ending is ironically about life. And like the song says, don't fear the Reaper.
Evil doesn't die. It changes shape.
Halloween Ends is a challenging horror sequel. I have my issues with it, and I question its effectiveness as a finale to the franchise or even this trilogy, but I still really like it. I'd say Halloween Ends is even one of my favorite Halloween movies, and honestly, a movie like this wasn't gonna satisfy everyone. They give fans what they expect, it's too predictable. They give fans something surprising, it's not what they wanted. It's a lose-lose scenario. So I appreciate that Halloween Ends just does its own thing without worrying what anyone will think, and it's at least the kind of conclusion that's open to interpretation and discussion, instead of a finale that's straightforward with nothing to talk about later. People are going to be arguing over Halloween Ends' merits for a long time, like a lot of the other controversial Halloween sequels. My only real major issues with Halloween Ends are how rushed the final act feels and how underwritten Allison's character is. I honestly really like Corey Cunningham, despite being added in this finale and taking it over. Maybe if Corey had appeared in some form in the previous two films, he might have been more embraced, but I think he's solid as a tribute to Laurie and Michael in what seems to be their final movie together. I doubt this will be the last time we see Michael Myers, of course. We'll probably meet him again in some new continuity eventually, but I do think this is the real end for Laurie Strode, or at least Jamie Lee Curtis's involvement in Halloween films, and it's a nice way to cap off Laurie's character with a definitive happy ending, as a departure from the darker endings the series often had.
See you in hell.
Halloween Ends also is a great celebration of John Carpenter's filmography, and it features some of Carpenter's best work as a composer. I can't stop listening to his output on Halloween Ends in the same way I can't stop watching and thinking about Halloween Ends. It's a film that's gonna stick with me for a long time. I give Halloween Ends a Cunningham out of Myers.
Y'all get the hell up off my property before I fuck y'all up.
So if this movie's called Halloween Ends, does that mean we should start calling the original film Halloween Begins? Before I go, give Goulashes and I's new riff view of Scooby-Doo The Mystery Begins a watch on the Gulag channel today. Link in the description. Subscribe to the Gulag channel too. I command it. This video is made possible through the pledges of my Patreon supporters, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to the kind folks pledged to my shoutouts tier. All of the support on Patreon means a lot to me, and it helps my dark influence continue to grow. If you like this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. Be sure to also keep in touch by following me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Dr. Wolfula. While I still have your attention, consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel and get bonus content like previews, VIP Discord server access, private movie night streams, and credits in videos. Consider pledging at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Also, check out official Dr. Wolfula t-shirts and other merch on tpublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Thanks for watching. See you all next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.